All right, so I think we'll get started. I just wanted to welcome everybody, all the attendees. Thank you for joining us. We're really appreciative of you coming in. I know, everybody is on Zoom all day, every day, so we do appreciate your attention. And so we have two awesome STEM superheroes here with us, which I will introduce them in a second. But I also wanted to share and introduce my collaborator, Jessica Perez. She's actually at University of Illinois. Hopefully you can see her with her cool headset. And my name is Angela Huang, and I am at Stanford. And so we individually work for these large networked organizations that are trying to share science, share information across many different universities. And so this is sort of one collaborative effort that we hope will be of many. So we're combining Ann and Debbie, who are again our STEM superheroes. So they're here to sort of give you an idea of what their life is like, or not chemistry, but career-wise, as well as sort of non-professionally, just to get a sense of what it's like to be a woman in STEM and things like that. So they'll walk us through their career, but you are always welcome to ask questions. The Q&A is open. Please use that as a way to ask questions, obviously, but also if you have any comments and things like that, don't be shy. And so, yeah, we will get started. Does that sound good to everyone? I can't really see anyone, but I'm going to assume that it's good with everyone. Okay. All right. So I'll let Ann introduce herself right here.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ann DeQuino, and I finished my PhD in biological sciences at Northwestern University. I didn't list it here, but for undergrad, I went to Western Washington University, which is a small liberal arts, primarily undergraduate institution in Bellingham, Washington. It's just about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of Seattle. And then I came out here to the Midwest for my PhD, and right now I work as a scientist at Stemloop in Chicago. And so I will walk you through my kind of career timeline in the next slide, and then tell you a little bit more about other less career-oriented things about myself. But in 1991, I was born in San Diego, California, and in fifth grade, I moved up to Bellingham, Washington. And so I went from like the sunniest place in the country to like the rainiest place in the country. Bellingham's extremely rainy, but that's why you probably see all those trees in the photo. It is one of the greenest places you can live, and the air quality is fantastic. And so I moved there, and I actually ended up staying in Bellingham to go to college. I stayed there. It was actually the only college I applied to. I didn't know if I was going to be going to college, and I ended up just staying close by to where my parents were at Western Washington University, which is probably a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. And so after high school, I went straight into college, but it took me 5 years to finish college. Usually people finish in 4, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And I'll mention this later on too, but I'm a first-generation college student, so I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to major in, and I definitely didn't even know how to like register for classes. So I started college at Western. I had no clue what I wanted to major in, and slowly kind of figured it out. I ended up majoring in biochemistry with a minor in math. And if you had met me before I went to college, that would have been the last thing you'd expect me to have majored in. I took maybe one AP science class in high school, and I just didn't like it at all. And I really didn't care for math or science then. I had actually thought that I was going to do an English major or something, or journalism, because I really like writing. But lo and behold, I ended up majoring in science, and I graduated from college 5 years later in 2014. And during that time between 2009 and 2014, I had thought a lot about like whether I wanted to go to medical school or nursing school or something along those lines. I had never really thought about graduate school, mostly because nobody had told me that you could do research and go to graduate school, and that was even a thing. And so a lot of my courses were geared towards me going into some sort of nursing career. But as I job shadowed like doctors and nurses, I realized that that was not something I could do at all. I couldn't even like look at a little bit of blood or somebody who would even like a scrape on their arm. And so luckily at the same time, I started doing some summer research opportunities, and my undergrad, I was very lucky that there were some research opportunities. And so as I started doing more research, people told me about graduate school. I applied to graduate school, and this time I cast a much larger net and I applied to maybe like 8 different schools. And I ended up choosing Northwestern because I had done a summer program there, which I hope all of you always apply for summer programs, because that is like one of the best things that I could have done for myself. And at that summer program, Northwestern had offered me early admission to grad school. So I didn't even have to pay for their application or apply anything. I just had to like show up for the summer program, do a good job, and then they offered me early admission, and that's the school I ended up going to. So I started grad school right after I graduated from college, and then another 5 years later, a very long 5 years, what felt like to me, I defended my thesis. And so I defended my thesis just right before the new year, at the end of last year's in December. And after defending my thesis, I thought I wanted to do a postdoc, and I had actually accepted a postdoc position at Stanford. But I asked for a little buffer time. COVID started to hit, and I had been doing a lot of volunteer work and teaching at a prison in Illinois, as well as the local jails. And I was teaching science and math there. And I had asked my postdoc advisor to kind of delay my job so that I could keep teaching at the prison. And I ended up taking a full-time job working at the prison teaching biology and math. And I did that for about 8 months, and then realized that I don't think I want to go do a postdoc. And so I ended up taking a job at a brand new startup company here in Chicago called Stemloop, with the intent of working while also maintaining a lot of the advocacy and activism work that I like to do outside of work. And so I've stayed here in Chicago despite hating the winter, and I've loved it so far working for this company. And I'm still in the process of kind of establishing my own programs surrounding prison advocacy and education. Okay, so outside of my professional life, I want to tell you a little bit about my background, and hopefully these photos highlight I come from a really large family. The sixth child is not even in any of these photos, which is really messed up, but there's 6 kids in my family. Just my other brother lives in Maryland, but it's almost all girls, and my blood brother is here. And my parents, they came and immigrated from Hong Kong to the US. And we moved around obviously a lot from California up to Bellingham. And neither of my parents had gone to college. My siblings hadn't gone to college. And I have an identical twin sister. We were the first ones to go to college and actually finish. And so I will say it was really, really difficult, but having a really supportive family, even ones that haven't been to college, was extremely important. And I was really, really thankful for that. So in these pictures, I have like my brother, my sisters, all of their significant others, and then the cutest niece and nephew, my brother's kids, who we went on our first family vacation like ever together. Was it last year or the year before? And we brought the kids to Disneyland, and it was a lot of fun. And then down in the bottom corner, you can see me and my twin sister. I'm number 145 and she's 144. But we are identical. We went to college together. We went to grad school together. She's in chemistry, I'm in biochemistry, and now she's actually at Stanford doing her postdoc. So this is the first time that we haven't been together in the next step of our careers, but we call every single day. So we're talking all the time still. Okay, so outside of work, I have a lot of hobbies. And I mean, I think I might have too many hobbies. I love sports. I love playing sports. I don't really watch sports, but I play volleyball, indoor, outdoor. I play tennis. Pretty much any racket sport I play, and I really, really love. I run, although I haven't been running in a long time because of COVID. You don't want to be racing along with tons of other people. I also really love doing science outreach. So I, throughout all of grad school and undergrad, I did a lot of like outreach and mentorship and teaching, whether it's teachers or younger students, how to do research. And I also really love sewing. So during the pandemic, I made so many masks. I don't even know how many masks I sewed, but I have yet to pick my sewing machine up again since that because it was so much sewing, but I definitely want to get back into that. I also have a cat who I love spending time with. And then it's very, very nerdy, but I also love making like punny Christmas or holiday cards that are science themed. To me, it's like a really fun way to teach my family about something science themed. So on the far side of your screen, there's a card that says Hist Ho Ho Hones, Merry Christmas. Histones are a biology term. And I was trying to teach my parents what exactly histones do by drawing it out as if it was part of this like little Santa-scape. But and lastly, I mentioned before, but I'm very active in activism and advocacy work, and I also love photography. So I just bring my camera with me. So this is one of the photos I took during some of the big protests in downtown Chicago, which to this day are still going on, even despite it getting colder here. So yeah, I do a lot of things outside of work, and that's why working at a startup company ended up working out perfectly for me. So I'd have my free evenings and free weekends to do other things.
Great. Thank you, Anne. So I think we're going to switch gears to Debbie. So I'm going to switch it over. All right. Okay, go
Great.
for it, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I resonate a lot with what Anne mentioned, so there'll be some overlap as well. So again, my name is Debbie Senesky. I'm an associate professor at Stanford, and I run the Extreme Environment Microsystems Laboratory there. And I want to say, Anne, you look familiar, so maybe I've seen your sister on campus. Next slide. Great. So this is my professional timeline. So I was born in the Philippines. I'm half African American, half Filipino, and moved to the United States when I was 6 years old, and grew up in Northern California, Fairfield, California, which is about 2 hours north of the Bay Area, and had most of my K through 12 education there. And in high school, moved to Las Vegas. My family moved around a lot. I went to 9 schools during my K through 12 education and ended up graduating in Las Vegas. So not shown here. I need to update my professional timeline. Is after I graduated from high school, I ended up going to UNLV, which was the local university. I was the first in my family to go to college as well, so first generation. And very similar to Anne, applying for college was something I had no idea about, navigated that myself. But I was really interested in math and science and art. It was something I always excelled at during my education. I think I really love puzzle solving. So that was something in my math class. Whenever we were dealing with equations and numbers, I viewed this as puzzle solving, and I enjoyed solving the puzzle. I loved it when I was able to get the look in the back of the book and get the same answer, and that I was able to solve that puzzle. And so I think that's something that really sparked my interest in the STEM fields, and also helped really seed me in being successful in engineering. So after I graduated high school, as I mentioned, I started at UNLV, which was the local college nearby. My dream school was actually UC Berkeley, because I lived near Berkeley when I was younger, and I didn't get into Berkeley the first time I applied. And so I started off at UNLV, and then after 2 years, I transferred. So I did really well at UNLV, and then I thought, okay, well maybe I can go to another school, and I wanted to get away from home, and so decided I wanted to live in LA, and then I applied to USC. So I remember drawing on a piece of paper a picture of I guess, I don't know if it's called the Oval technically at USC, but this sort of flower garden in the middle of campus. So I drew that on a piece of paper, and I kind of envisioned myself there. And eventually I applied and got in. USC is a private school, very expensive. So that was something that was a really big concern for my family. I grew up in a uh, single parent household. My mother raised four girls on her own. And so there was a lot of, questions about could we afford me going to USC. So I ended up having to take personal loans in order for me to go there, and also financial aid. So there is financial aid. That was something that really, if we didn't have financial aid, and also scholarships, because I had a high GPA at UNLV, I was able to get scholarships as well. So I had a mix of scholarships, financial aid, and loans as well. And so I was able to go to USC. And during my time there, really enjoyed, living away from home and being in LA. And during the summer, when you're in school, you have open summers. So you could do an internship. And I actually did something different in one of my summers at USC. I ended up doing research. Applied for this research program at UC Berkeley, my dream school. So you could go there in the summer and do research. And so I wanted to spend a summer in Berkeley. So I applied to this program and I ended up getting in. And that is really what exposed me to graduate school. There was a question about, do you need to go to grad school to get a PhD? And so, yes, you do, because graduate school is I guess a program which you take after your undergraduate career. You can either get a master's degree or a PhD. So I have both. I have a master's degree and a PhD. And spending that time at Berkeley really exposed me to what graduate school was like and what research in a graduate school was like. I was designing little walking robots in a lab at Berkeley. And so that was fun. And then after that, I ended up also working another summer. I decided to try something different and did an internship at a company, Hewlett Packard. I was helping to make inkjet printer components. And that was really fun and exposed me to industry as well. So after I graduated from USC, I studied mechanical engineering, and I decided to continue on to graduate school. I was loving school so much. I didn't want to go and work in a company quite yet. Wasn't ready to do that. And so I went to Berkeley and ended up pursuing. First, I thought I was going to get a master's degree only, but I ended up loving research and stayed on and ended up getting a PhD degree. And I was really encouraged by my mentor there as well to stay on and get a PhD. So that was really a pivotal moment in me deciding whether or not I wanted to continue school and get a PhD. As you know, it can take time. It took me 6 years to get a PhD, but I really enjoyed the research and enjoyed that environment. And after I got my PhD, I didn't want to be a professor. And although my research advisor was encouraging me to be a professor, I ended up going to industry and I worked for GE. That was also a fun experience, but I really missed the research environment. So I ended up leaving my career in industry and going back to UC Berkeley to become a postdoc. So what's a postdoc? So a postdoc is a postdoctoral researcher. This is something you can do at a university after the PhD. You're all done with classes, but you can work in a university and do research. So clearly I love research and I love being in a university setting. So I ended up going back to Berkeley to do that. And that was really fun for me. I also got to teach a class and learn about what it's like to be a professor. Again, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a professor, but eventually I landed on that. And then I started to go on the job market and I interviewed for faculty positions. And now I work at Stanford and have been at Stanford for 8 years. And it's been super, super fun. I get to work with people like Angela and Jessica and other faculty members and students and meet people like Ann, and talk to students like yourself. It's really a fun career. And so it's something I've enjoyed. And what I want to say is that I've done these U-turns. I kind of changed my mind, or I wasn't sure about things after I graduated. And I think those were points that allowed me to really land on this decision to pursue academia and become a professor. And now I really enjoy my career. Next slide. So I also had hobbies along the way. I need to update this. So this ends in 2014, where my daughter was born in 2014. So now she's 6 years old. But before she was born, I've had a variety of hobbies. I love music. My family, I have a big family. I have 3 sisters, so there's 4 of us and a cousin, and we love karaoke. So that's a big thing for us. Dancing. When I was a postdoc, I did Polynesian dance. That was super fun. I think that allowed me to get over my stage fright, being able to perform in front of people on the stage. That was really helpful in my career now. Art, French, swimming, and tennis. I really loved tennis in high school. I'm not very good at it, although I'm starting to pick it up again. And so maybe we can play tennis sometime if you're ever around. So starting to learn tennis again and perfecting that. I'm not very good, but I like a challenge, so that's been fun. And then more recently, in addition to tennis, I also play poker as well. That's a new hobby. Again, I love math and puzzles and statistics, and maybe I'm a little bit competitive in nature as well. So poker is super, super fun, and not good at that either, but trying to learn. And that's something I do in my spare time. Again, my family's from Las Vegas, so that's what I do when I go visit. Next slide. So on the research side, so now that I'm a professor at Stanford, in addition to teaching classes, I also do research. So I have a laboratory. When you become a professor, they give you space to do your experiments. I'm an experimentalist, and the area of research, or the types of experiments we do, are for advancing electronics and nanomaterials for space exploration. In particular, I develop high temperature materials and electronics to help people like NASA place landers on extreme environment locations such as Venus. This is a particular focus of my group. We have programs in collaboration and funded with NASA to help build high temperature electronics so we can probe Venus. Venus is our neighboring planet. It's a high temperature planet and also very chemically corrosive. This yellow haze you see in the background, this is sulfuric acid and supercritical CO2. So it's a very chemically harsh environment, and it's really hard for electronics and materials to survive that environment. So we have simulation environments in my laboratory. So that's a lot of fun as well. And next slide. So in addition to having fun doing research, I get to mentor amazing students in my lab and in my classes as well. I love helping the next generation reach their goals and figure out their goals. So that's really been fun. So people pursue their graduate studies in my lab. So you see me in this blue regalia here. That's the regalia for UC Berkeley. I finally got to go to my dream school, and I got a PhD there. And now I get to help other students at Stanford get their PhD. So that's Karen next to me in black. She was a part of Poets too, doing research in my lab. And she recently graduated. She has a PhD now, and she's off working in government, and she might become a professor one day. So that's super fun. And this is, in the middle is a picture of my daughter. Love to expose her to science as well. This was, I think, her 4th birthday party we had at one of the science museums. So again, want to also expose her to science. Although she loves animals, that's a big focus of hers. She knows every fun fact about every lizard and reptile and such. So who knows, maybe she'll go into the biosciences. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. So I'm actually going to stop sharing, and I think I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box. But otherwise, I have a few set of questions that I will be asking. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. If not, we will keep going. And again, this will be recorded or is being recorded. All right. So, all right. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm just trying to arrange my windows. Okay. So, let's start with Anne first. Question is, how did you know you wanted to study STEM? And you kind of touched upon, what inspired you though? So maybe kind of going in more depth with your answer.
Yeah, I had mentioned doing some of those summer research programs, and for me, it was there were mixed reasons why I ended up applying to those summer research programs, and it was more than just research programs. I had done a few summer medical education programs too, and that my entire life, like besides moving from California to Bellingham, Washington, I had never traveled, and so it also was an extremely attractive opportunity for me to travel for free, go to a different state, get away, and like try something totally new. And so that was a huge motivator for me, even though that wasn't necessarily an academic motivation. It was more like, oh, let me go see something new. And so I applied for them. And as I applied for them, that's where I learned a lot about like what it is like to be a scientist and the different fields that you can go into if you have interest in science. And I also met a ton of other students who were like me, who were first generation college students or weren't necessarily thinking about going into science. And we all kind of motivated each other. And so seeing them and like watching them also go through the same steps as me. But the big and final, I guess, like motivator for what inspired me to go like to grad school and get a PhD was my last summer research program at Northwestern with a professor named Heather Pinkett. And she was my mentor, and she was actually the person who every time I really didn't think I was good at research. A lot of things weren't working for me, and I didn't realize that that is very common for everybody. And but I didn't give up, and she ended up nominating me to be like the class speaker for that summer program, and I was selected. And I did not think that I necessarily deserved to be there, but then at that point, I realized like I guess I am pretty good. Or maybe I do deserve to be a part of this. And then she was also the person who nominated me for early admission. And at that point, I was like, wow, she like really actually sees something in me. And that meant a lot to me. And so at that point, I was like, okay, somebody definitely sees that I can do this, and I think I can do this too. And so those were big pushes that kind of like put me in the right direction.
Mhm. That's great. Debbie, did you want to add anything to that by any chance? Otherwise, we have some good questions rolling in that we can answer.
Let's switch to another question.
Okay. I think this one is a great question, which is how do you manage your time well and avoid procrastination?
Okay, shall I take that one?
Go ahead. Yeah.
How do I don't know if I do. I try. I aspire to manage my time well. I and avoid procrastination. I think it's human nature to procrastinate, but I don't call it procrastinating. I think it's like gaining your reserve. Sometimes you need a break and recognizing you need to have some downtime. So you're actually doing something good, even though you might not be working, and it's important to have that balance. And I think in today's world, everyone is busy. And no matter what career you have, you're balancing your work and your personal life. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I had her when I was 2 years into my job at Stanford. And people tell you don't have a child in the beginning stages of your academic career because you're building up your lab. But, I decided it was something that I really wanted to do. And so the way I manage it is having support. And so I have an au pair. An au pair is someone who lives with you and helps with childcare duties. This is something that has really helped with my family. Our au pair is from Poland, so we also get an international experience and learn about her culture as well. So that's been very, very helpful and fruitful. And even with COVID, now having someone here to help with childcare She helps a lot with the schooling. That's been fantastic. And she's a part of the family. So I think recognizing when you need support that helps with time management. Also, choosing wisely all the things that you are doing. How do you have energy and time? And are you spreading yourself too thin? Are you focusing on the things that are really important to you? I get invited to serve on panels such as this, or give talks, or travel when pre COVID, travel to give talks and things like that, or serve on committees on campus. And so, really taking a pulse and saying, is this something I'm excited about? Because that's your time, which is valuable. And so, I think being very selective, and even the projects that you do, I think I look at the research programs. It's not just about having the funding, or having yet another program. It's about, at this point in my career, it's about, am I enjoying this work? Is that important to me? And so I think if you're doing the things that you love, then you find the time. And then also, I think being careful about not spreading yourself out too thin.
Thank you, Debbie. All right, so we have another question. I like, what helped you discover, or I guess we kind of said that already. How hard were the courses? Is a good question. Mm.
I guess
Yeah.
in college, oh my gosh, I thought my courses were so hard. I mean, I remember my very first quarter of college still, I made the mistake of taking calculus, and that was, at least for me, I felt like it was a mistake. My sister and I actually were in my twin sister and I were in the exact same class, and both of us struggled so hard. I remember every day thinking, I'm like, I'm gonna fail out of college and it's because of this class. So calculus is really hard, and then my biology class too. But in every case, I seriously took advantage of all and any resources that school had to offer me. Free tutoring in the library, I was there. Office hours, I was there. Like, they had a math center, I was there. Like, I found people immediately as well as I possibly could. It was a little hard for me to make friends in college at first, but I would just kind of look around. I'm like, who else is making the face that I'm making after I just got my test score back? I'm like, we probably can't help each other study, but we can support each other and find someone who can help us study. And so finding that was really important. And my first quarter in college, I didn't have awful grades, but I did better than I had expected. And I think a huge thing was my professor saw how hard I was trying, and there was some serious improvement from the first like half of the quarter to the end of it. And then with each year, it's like I started getting into a flow of figuring out like how to succeed in each class. Each one was a little bit different, and that definitely that led me to do a lot better in my courses. And I ended up graduating cum laude, so with a really, really high GPA. And that was not with a lot of tears, a lot of like a lot of long, long nights, but a lot of support from anyone I could get from around me.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. Um, all right. I like this one, and I think both should answer this one, which is, how hard is it to work in a male dominated environment? Or I guess maybe an alternative to that is, what have you had to do to navigate through that? So maybe Debbie can go first, and then Anne, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. This is, I think, a tough question for me because again, I went to 8 different schools growing up. I'm biracial. I've had to start over and immerse myself in new environments, and also not feeling as though I fit in, I think, for most of my K through 12 education. So I think when I went into engineering, being the only woman or girl in the class was maybe not so uncomfortable to me. I think I actually enjoyed being the only girl in class and getting all the A's. So there was, again, this kind of like competitive streak, maybe. Not to say that you want to be competitive, but I enjoyed standing out, and I think maybe I got to exercise that standing out in the crowd and when I was growing up. And so I think that's something that you can kind of flip it around. How can, because you are different, because you're the only woman in a male dominated field, what are the good things about that? I can be a role model or an example for others to show them that they can succeed. And I personally think that gender, race, these things should not even be a topic or a question, because everyone is capable and intelligent. And I think figuring out how to see that within yourself can also be a way of navigating that environment. Of course, things happen. I'm not going to say it's perfect. People make an off comment or make assumptions. That certainly has happened in my career. I try to deal with that directly. Again, I grew up in a household of very strong-minded women, very vocal, very direct. So yeah, I've had to be direct with people, and then usually you find that they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to, do that, and then you become best friends after that. That's happened a few times in my career. So yeah, that's how I navigate.
Thank you, Debbie. And Anne, yeah.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, I remember in high school being the only girl in, I was like in a shop and CAD course, and I really, really wanted to take that course. And but I ended up being the only girl in that class. And similarly, I also really liked that feeling of standing out. But also, what I liked the most was thinking like, wow, I can do this just like them, if not better, and usually better. I was like, my CAD designs look so much better than these boys. And then after that, going into college, that was where things started to slip. Where like I had enrolled in that calculus class thinking, oh yeah, I can do this, only to find out immediately that, I was really in over my head. But I remember thinking like over and over again, I was like, wow, this comes so easy to the guys. Why is it not that easy for me? And I remember saying that so many times. And it's like, no, it turned out they put on like a face. I think they struggle. Everybody struggles just the same. It's just how you perceive it yourself and how people choose to show other people. And in college, a lot of the guys in the math classes want to seem like they know everything. And so they certainly make it look like that. But it turned out a lot of them were struggling just as much as me. And I could have never guessed had I not accidentally talked to one of the guys who I was like, oh, wow, like he's super smart. And me and my sister were like, he always sits behind us. Let's just talk to him. And turned out he was getting the exact same grades as us, which were not good. And I was like, you look so confident. He's like, oh, really? No, I think that's just a look we have. so, and then, so then I started to kind of get it. But through college, that was a huge issue that always came up was in my mind. I was like, it comes a lot easier to them, but it turned out it didn't. And in grad school, that became very apparent in the lab where sometimes I would think, I'm like, wow, some of the guys are really good at research. And then come to find out when I'm actually side by side in the lab or like at any of those summer research programs, and I actually like take a really good look, I realize that I'm doing just as good of work, if not better, usually better, because I'm so detail oriented, so organized. And like the pattern of how I think through projects is a little bit more robust or like has a little bit more of a storyline. And so I feel like at every step of the way, even when I started to feel like, oh, wow, like the guys are doing it better, or they're acting like they're doing it better, that's what I realize is they're acting like it or I'm perceiving it like that. And so just talking to myself and reminding myself like, oh, look at everything I have been able to accomplish has really helped solidify to me that I'm as good, if not above, the men who I work with.
Those were great answers. Thank you. That was awesome. All right. So we have a few more questions. One thing that I think I'm just going to throw out there, which I think is a reasonable question, but is always a touchy subject, is what's your average salary? So I'll just front load and say you can Google that. You can get generally paid pretty well. I don't know if you want to comment on any of that, Anne or Debbie, but I would just say if you have your PhD in STEM, you are very likely to make somewhere, and this is a ballpark because I think it also varies on where you live, but pretty close to six figures, if not more. But again, that's depending on the actual job you have, et cetera, et cetera. But you can get a very good salary, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question because you could be evaluating fields based on the income that you want to have. And so engineering and science typically has good incomes. You can also have the background to go into a startup company. You might want to try that out after you graduate as well. So yes, having a graduate degree will tip, as Angela said, would be in the six-figure range or around that, at least even at some point in your career, if not right away. And it could be geography dependent too.
And I also think that's a super fair question to ask. And I feel like income and salary should always be transparent. Like, it pains me to not know like that, how, like, I mean, this is why there's like a huge pay discrepancy between men and women in many fields, in particular science. And I feel like if there was more transparency, that wouldn't be the case, because look at all that we can accomplish. And so yeah, it definitely depends on your geographic location. I know when I was applying for jobs, which wasn't that long ago, different startup companies, and a startup is like, literally, it's what it sounds like. It just started. And so I was looking at different startup companies. Mostly I didn't want to work for like a huge pharma company, but big pharma companies and big biotech companies, that's definitely a six-figure salary easily starting out. So a lot of my friends starting out were offered like 100 to 120K at the really big companies, and most of the startups, it was smaller but still very decent, like 80 to 90K. And that's just because those smaller startup companies don't have quite as much money, or I guess revenue, quite yet. But still, you can make good money at either of those places. And teaching, to the job that I had looked at a lot was teaching at a community college. And the issue with that is whether you're a full-time or part-time. And full-time, you get paid well, but part-time, it's not as good. But you can still, you can do a lot of things and make money with a STEM degree.
And actually, one thing I wanted to just chime in, because some people may not always know this, but usually, if you do pursue a higher level degree in STEM, like a master's or a PhD, generally that is paid for. Obviously, undergrad, you usually have to pay, but I do want to, make it clear that almost always, if you do choose to do a PhD, it will be paid for, because you are, effectively a partial employee of the university that you go to do the research.
I just wanted to add, that was a huge reason I went to grad school too. Was medical school, as a lot of you probably know, costs so much money. And not only could I physically not stomach medical school and like having to see some of the pain that people are in, but it costs way too much. And I paid my way through college as well through scholarships. And then when somebody told me grad school is paid for, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the biggest scholarship there is. And because not only is it paid for, you get a stipend on top of that. And if you write grants, or if you write a fellowship application, you win it, you can make even more money on top of that. So in grad school, you could be making, I mean, at Northwestern, it was, I think, 32,000 a year or something. But if you got a fellowship on top of that, it could be 40,000 a year while not having to pay for any of your classes. So that was the first time where I was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like having a little mini career while getting a degree. And you can't really argue with that.
We have another question that's incoming, which is, how difficult is it to acquire and maintain a scholarship? Does anyone want to take that? Yes.
So a scholarship, I'm assuming this is a scholarship that would be given to you to help pay for your education. And so there might be scholarship requirements potentially. I don't think that's typical. So once you get the scholarship, it's usually yours to help either pay for tuition. It might be specific. It might have to go to tuition, or it might have to go to supplies. So understanding what are the requirements, and then there might be a GPA requirement for the scholarship, but I think that's very rare. I haven't come across that recently, but that might exist. So you might be looking out for that when you apply for various scholarships. But I think apply for scholarships. There could be scholarships inside of your university and even outside of your university. So I think that's really important to do. And once you have that scholarship, typically it is, yours to spend how you like, as long as it goes to support your education.
And just to add to that, I thought it was really important to apply for, like, I know even Jessica and I had talked about this when we mentored students too, that like applying for a lot of the small scholarships, it really adds up because fewer people, I think a lot of students want to go for the big ones, but there's very limited number of acceptances to those, where the smaller ones people are maybe sometimes forgetting about, but there's also more of those. And so there's also internal scholarships where once you're in college, then like within your department, they offer those. So like I was constantly applying for scholarships every quarter of every year throughout college. And that's how I ended up paying for my entire college.
Yeah, and there can, just to add, there can be a compounded effect. So if you win a scholarship, that looks great on your resume, and then that might help you win another one later. So, or help you get into the kind of school you want to get into. So I think even applying for small ones just to get that recognition is also a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So I think one thing, and I think Anne may have already touched upon a little bit of this, but who were your role models in STEM throughout your career? I think that was a good question as well. Maybe Debbie, do you want to go first? Because Anne kind of answered, but I'm sure you have more to say.
Sure. Yeah. I had a lot of role models throughout my career, people who I looked up to. A lot of them were my professors in my classes or my advisors. So I really recommend nurturing those relationships. So I had a professor in my undergrad who, I was considering switching majors from engineering to psychology. And she looked me straight in the face and she said, "No, Debbie, you're an engineer." And that just like blew me away. And so I ended up, okay, and staying in engineering. And I think that certainty that she had and that confidence she had in me was very pivotal. So looking out for that, and my advisor during my graduate studies was a great mentor. And then looking out for role models, there might be people you don't know who are your role models. I have various faculty members that I look up to that may not even know me. I just look at their website and I'm like, oh, okay, I like it. I like what they're doing. I like how they're framing their work. There's a professor at Harvard. She wrote this article about being a professor and having a child on the tenure track. She was my mentor. Eventually, I met her, but I read her article, and she was a role model for me, somebody who was successful in their career. And I actually got to meet her at a conference, and I told her that her article changed my life, And so, yeah, so I think looking out for people who inspire you in your work life and also in your personal life or even hobbies. So I think that's important to do.
Great. And Anne, did you want to chime in at all? I know you already talked about a little bit, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I guess since I kind of mentioned that Heather Pinkett was like a huge role model for me, I did have other role models as well. But she's the one that stands out the most. But something that I didn't figure out until later on that I definitely suggest for people looking for role models and mentors is like reaching out. And it doesn't have to be like the most famous person, you don't have to like go to like a top tier professor and be like, will you be my mentor? Because they're probably too busy. But like even just finding someone who's just a few steps ahead of you on that path. So like if you're in high school, maybe like reaching out to somebody who that you've seen is in college or finishing up college and just saying like, oh, I'm just wondering if you'd be interested in like mentoring me. I just have like a couple of questions. I'd say like a lot of students want to help other students. I guess it depends who you reach out to, but usually you can tell, like, especially if they're in a lab, for instance, maybe they've been mentored by somebody. And so that should give them a little bit of interest in mentoring other students and just reaching out and seeing like, oh, if you're willing to like have a discussion once a week with me, or if you're able to like read over this thing that I wrote that's about like a science project, or even if it's not you and you have a suggestion for somebody who might be able to, it's good to try and find those people. Sometimes it doesn't happen supernaturally if you're a really shy person. So you have to just kind of reach out via an email or something.
Yeah, I think Debbie and Anne bring up really good points, which is you may not have a STEM role model right now, but you can always find one. Everyone is, generally speaking, everyone is willing to help or wants to help. someone else in need. So, if you may not just automatically have one, you should find or seek one out like Anne did or has in the past. One question that is coming in is it normal to not go to college immediately after graduating high school or not? So, that linear path versus, I know that Debbie talked about like the U-turns and things like that. So if you want to speak to that.
I was just going to say, I mean, I went to college directly after high school, but it was a very last minute decision for me, which is why I only applied to one college and luckily got in and went. But I'd say, like, at least at that stage, going from high school to college, I mean, I can't say because I didn't take the other route, but I'd say the barrier to entry after that might be harder. So it might be better to go straight in, but you don't have to go straight to university. You could do some community college classes, or you could just do like one class at a time. There's lots of other tiered options too that I'm very, very supportive of. But I do think had I not gone, it would have been really hard for me to get myself motivated to go back.
Yeah, and there might be programs that you could participate in that might even help your college application. I know some people enter the Peace Corps, for example. There might be other interesting programs that I'm not aware of. I know in Europe it's very common for after high school for people to take a year overseas and spend some time traveling, and that might help you figure out what you want to pursue in terms of your major or where you want to go. And I think that's fine. I think taking a pulse and understanding what's important to you in that moment. And then understanding that, yeah, it's not too late to turn around and make a shift. Or try working, go work, try it, see how you like it, maybe you like it and jump into that. But school is always an option for you. I like what Anne said. You could start at community college and then transfer or not, stay in community college if that works for you. So there are many, many options.
Great. How did you know what major you wanted to major in?
It was definitely not obvious to me, which is why it took me a long time. I don't even think I started my major classes until like my third year in college because it took me so long. And then it was like accelerated, like I need to speed up and get through all of these. In most colleges, I'd say probably all colleges and universities, there's general university required classes. And in one of those, I had to take a science, which is why I took biology along with calculus in my first year. I wanted to get rid of that science requirement, but I ended up really liking that biology class. And so I see now why those GURs or general university requirements are there. It's because of people like me where I didn't know and I wouldn't have taken that otherwise. And that was one of the last classes that was available for registration because I was so late on registering too. And I'm glad I did register for it because I really loved it. And after that, I kept having it in the back of my mind. I was like, maybe I'll take another one of those. Maybe I'll take another one of those. And later on down the line, I was really thankful for that because I majored in biochemistry.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can, and some universities allow you to have some time. I know at Stanford you have 2 years before you declare a major. But if you're not sure, but if you have a general idea, if you want to go into the STEM field, science and engineering or math, you might take those core requirements plus some math or the science requirements that in anticipation of those last courses in the last 2 years.
Awesome. Okay. I think maybe we have time for a few more questions. We are getting to the hour. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I have a question is, what do you think is the best part of your job and the not so good part of your job?
Right now. And I totally apologize. I forgot to add a slide about my job completely. And so I do have a job and I do bench research as well. And I'm at a startup company. And what I really like about my job is the project that I work on. There are a lot of things I like about my job. I actually like who I work for. I like who I work with, and I like what I work on. And so I'm actually making biosensors, like basically leveraging and repurposing biology to sense for different contaminants in our environment. And specifically, I'm trying to make rapid COVID tests, as well as for this pathogen called Legionella, which is a bacteria that builds up in people's pipes, especially when buildings are kind of sitting for a long time, which is exactly what's happening during the pandemic. And that bacteria can cause people to get pneumonia-like symptoms. So it's going to be like COVID round 2. And so I love working on that project. I love that it's also very community centered. Like the company I work for, they're very passionate about making things that like individuals in our community can actually use. And I like the day-to-day like actual lab work. What I don't like is, because it's such a small company, there's literally only 3 of us working there right now. I have to do a little bit of everything, like things that I did not expect to be doing. Like, I'm like, oh, now I'm the person who does all of the ordering and all of it. Like, I feel like I'm the lab tech, I'm the scientist, and I'm like a project manager. And I'm like, I did not expect to be doing that, but there are good and bad things about it, but it's a lot all at once.
Awesome. And then Debbie?
Yeah, similarly, I think what I love most about my work is the people. I often feel like I work with my friends, getting to know Angela through the work at Nano at Stanford, Jessica as well. You start to know people over the years, and you start to have a sense of community. And that also goes for the projects that I work on. There are faculty members that I collaborate with that, again, I view them as my friends, and we're solving these problems together, and also my students. And I have the flexibility, being an academia, to choose who I work with pretty much. Not always, but I have a lot of flexibility in that. And I try to work on projects that I enjoy with people that I like and enjoy and respect. And so that's been a great part of my career. And then as an educator, as a professor, I get to continuously learn new things. So I love that about the research. I'm learning new things all the time through my students' work, and then also teaching is a form of learning and mastering the content. So as you guys are studying in your classes, imagine teaching someone what you're studying. There's a whole layer and level of appreciation and deepness in that knowledge as an educator. The things that I don't like, I think, are similar to Anne, just the numerous tasks that I have to do and handle. And, that feeling of never being on top of things, that's just the baseline at this point. Yeah, so learning how to, again, have a balance and figuring out how to manage things. Those are things that, I think are part of the work, but continuously trying to work on that and figure it out. So.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think we are to time. So I would like to give a big round of applause, big round of virtual applause to Debbie and Anne for taking the time out, as well as our attendees and audience for paying attention and asking really awesome questions. So what we'll do is, since this meeting is being recorded, we will post the recording. We had a question come in on where can you find it. So what I'll do is process the video and then post it online. And I'll share the link with everyone that registered, as well as our attendees, panelists. And then you guys are welcome to share out. And I think Jessica and I are going to work together and see if we can continue doing this in some shape or form as the year goes on. So other than that, yeah, thank you very much for everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a lovely afternoon or evening at this point. I'm not sure where everyone is tuning in from. My dog is nudging me to go for a walk. So, yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.